Good afternoon, everyone. My apologies that I will be only speaking in English. Even though my name sounds Russian, I do not speak the language. I'm sorry. But welcome, everyone. I'm very, very excited to have this conversation. We have a very esteemed panel, and we will be discussing interesting concepts such as trust, ethics, education, and how we deliver a fair and appropriate financial services in a digital space. So I want to, first off, introduce you to our panel, and I would ask that Viktor, you would begin. Would you please tell us who you are, where you, and what you focus on, and then we will have a continued discussion. But would you please kick us off?
Thank you very much for such. Sorry, I forgot we are speaking Russian. We decided to speak Russian.
If you would like to speak in English, I'm happy.
Okay. Здравствуйте.
Good afternoon, my name is Viktor Dostov. For more than 20 years, I'm dealing with the advanced electronic money and electronic payment, digital cash, and historically, I did that as a businessman, and now I'm doing that as the chairman of the Association of the Electronic Money. And I also am a fellow of the St. Petersburg University, and in that capacity, me and my colleagues, we do a lot of analytics dedicated to the electronic money and remittance.
Thank you. Electronic money. We're going to move on from electronic money to startup land. Kirill.
Добрый день, коллеги. Меня зовут Kirill.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Kirill. Kaem. I'm Senior Vice President for Innovation, Skolkovo Foundation. The main role of Skolkovo is to be at the crossroad between the startups or the teams which would like to become startups, the state, and major corporations and mid-sized corporations. We try to bring them all together for the sake of all of us. Skolkovo Foundation is about more than 2,000 startups. About 700 startups are working in the digital area. And speaking about the ethics and moral things and digitalization, probably, I can raise several cases of such startups.
Moving from startup land to the banking side. Sergey, would you please introduce yourself?
Спасибо. Добрый вечер.
Thank you. Good evening, actually. I have a very mundane profession. I am an IT director of Otkritie Bank, and we represent here at Finopolis our project, which we are doing for the second year and which we will complete in a year's time, the project of the transformation of the banking group to consolidate the banking sector. We actually provided a detailed presentation of that at our booth, and we will present our achievements, the unified frontal solutions, and we're doing a lot for the SME, small, medium-sized enterprises.
Thank you very much. Max, can you talk to us about your place in the entire ecosystem and consulting side of this, please?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Добрый вечер, коллеги.
Good evening. My name is Max Hauser. I'm a managing director and partner of BCG. I'm working for the Moscow office. I'm in charge of our digital BCG branch. The main focus is on the transformation which is taking place in the banks. We would like to digitalize the banks and to make the banks more digital-centric. And I do think that the banks will be more ethical after all today's discussion.
Mikhail, tell us your place in the context of the regulatory framework.
Спасибо. Спасибо.
Thank you so much. My name is Mikhail Mamuta. I'm head of the Service for Consumer Protection and Financial Inclusion Bank of Russia. Actually, probably it is clear what we do. We also are dealing with the financial literacy and the topic of our today's discussion. For us is very much interesting. Within that discussion, which lies ahead, I will tell you how the Bank of Russia sees the main challenges related to the digital transformation in terms of the accessibility of the service in terms of the financial excellence and knowledge, how we may ram this knowledge home to the clients, and how we may protect the clients' data in that changing world.
Guzeliya, please.
Добрый вечер, коллеги. Меня зовут
Good afternoon. My name is Guzeliya Imaeva. I am CEO of the NAFI Research Center. If I may propose a metaphor, we try to understand what millions of people think about, but the main focus is about research in the financial behavior of the people. For many years, we are studying the financial literacy, and this way, we help our financial institutions to take adequate and efficient decisions.
As you can see here, we have representatives from across the entire ecosystem with very specific responsibilities and views on how we can actually improve how we deliver financial services, but understanding how people can best benefit from them. And I think one of the most important things is, as we have been discussing digitization and the move towards mobile banking, internet banking, things that are not traditionally touchable like cryptocurrency or different new product sets, that there is a very important component that we often leave undiscussed, and that is actually how humans behave and how we are wired to behave. And we make a lot of assumptions in technology about how to design for that. And one of the first questions I really would like for us to discuss in this is, how do we start building trust in technology, especially for those customers who are not familiar with digitization or who are not digital natives? And Sergey, I think it would be important from a bank perspective, what are some of those thoughts that you have around designing for trust for non-digital natives? And I believe we'll have a very insightful discussion around this. Please set this up for us as the first question.
Thank you so much. I will be brief. In a nutshell, I think that from the standpoint of the bank, in order to build trust to technologies, to digitalization, such a technology should be very simple. It should improve the interaction between the client and the bank, so to say, and it has to help to avoid mistakes. Before, probably, person may have certain service within a bank and avoided the use of different technologies, and then he masters this technology, and this path should be very enjoyable. So the client should understand that this new quality which he acquires, starting interacting with the digital channels or digital technologies, it should be enjoyable because this is more convenient, this is simple, surprisingly simple, and probably this person never thought about that in that sense. And thirdly, it should be more efficient, much faster than the channel which he used before. So it should bring about some quality change, and it should be very tangible from the very outset. And what the services which clients start using, the services which we offer as the bank, they have to become aids and assistants. They have to ease the current activity, the current life of our clients. They have to facilitate the use of the services. And secondly, thing which I'd like to note, the services which are offered by the bank, they have to be reliable in terms of the access. So it should be failure-free. It should be not inconvenient when a person wants to do something. He should not fail to do that because the service is not available, is not accessible. So the bank should make sure that it is accessible, reliable, easy, friendly, etc.
That is a very technologist approach and a very technology-oriented answer. And it does make sense in terms of simplicity and transparency and reliability and consistency. When we talk about human behavior for those people that are not technologists, Guzeliya, you've done some interesting research into this. So give us a little bit of insight around trust and reliability and consistency, and how people who are not technologists perceive that, and how, and some of what your research is showing about people who are not digitally native.
Да, спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. We actually pay great attention to that question. Really, digitalization has changed the landscape of the financial services and the communication channels with the clients. Every fifth financial organization will have to cut its financial infrastructure, will become digital, meaning that the landscape will change. But most of the consumers have already appreciated the benefits of the digitalization. Two-thirds of the adults are using mobile internet banking. 11% are using a contactless payment system, and lots of people say that they do not go to the banks. They don't have to be physically present in the banks because they can actually solve everything remotely. Digital divide is still there. One-third of the people are somehow attributable to that category of people, the people who are not using digital products and who do not use the remote banking services. Let me share some insights why it stops people. So there is a generational gap. The elderly people, the people from the rural areas, the low-income people, low-educated people are there, but there are people who are just technophobic. And people say that they're afraid of pushing their own button, end quote. This is one of the most frequent answers of our respondents. And another thing which I'd like to highlight, and which we have not touched upon, this is the self-exclusion topic. Our international colleagues are dealing with that topic very efficiently. When everything is available, all the financial services are available, all the necessary gadgets are there, and digital channels are there, but people prefer to opt out of that system because they are not financially literate, or if they run into some challenges or difficulties from the very outset. For instance, a quite old person tried to pay for the first time his utility fees using a digital channel, and he failed to do that. Actually, then debt accrued, and then the lady would say that I will never, ever use that system again. So this is not a question of the financial accessibility or the service accessibility, but rather this is about the financial literacy. How to bring about the trust? We are studying financial literacy for 4 years. We are also studying the digital literacy. But the financial education, this is another phenomenon. And there is another phenomenon which is called the digital financial literacy. We try to define this term very accurately in order to measure that. And actually, there is no clear-cut definition of what it is. And we proceed from what's been mentioned by the Asian Bank of Development when the digital financial literacy is about the understanding of the non-conventional services such as robo-assistance. This is also about understanding the risks brought by the digital environment, and this is about the opportunity to somehow deter these risks. Mis-selling, etc. These are the risks, including the loss of the personal data and loss of the identification data. And what should be done? Russia is one of the advanced countries in terms of the implementation of the educational programs aimed at improving the financial literacy. And we see that the digital component is lagging behind there, meaning that lots of programs are launched and different channels are launched, but we have to start to integrate these programs with the digital financial literacy. Otherwise, we can lose lots of clients.
I think it's quite interesting because you talk about the human experience, and I remember teaching my father to pay his bills online a few years ago, and his fear of what would happen and his discomfort, and he is 85 years old, and he's making this behavioral change. And he wanted to have a very consistent, reliable, clear approach to doing this, and he's not digital native. So there is an interesting thing when we talk about what does trust look like from a cultural perspective, from a generational perspective, from an education level. And there is a baseline. I think, Sergey, you were absolutely right. There is consistency, transparency, and reliability. That's the first step in terms of a solution or the way we design this. But there is something that we also need to consider, which is how does technology for everyone, and how does this new digital space actually start to affect our behavior? Not just what we need, but how we actually behave online. And I think, Kirill, you've got quite a bit of insight as you've been working with these startups. Give us an idea of how that affects how people behave, how corporates behave, and how governments and institutions behave.
Ну, во-первых, мы с вами живем в очень...
First and foremost, we're living in a very interesting age. And probably 2 weeks ago, a new national holiday was born. Since the 1st of October, we got the notion of a digital law in our legislation, and it will change the landscape within which we live. Probably it may happen in a couple of hundreds years ago that a couple of artificial intelligences after the revolution of the machines will celebrate that day. And with no people there on the earth. But jokes aside, I do think that this is about religion. Our religion is about technologies, and this is what determines the social interaction between us. Speaking about digitalization of what is going on, a person, if he is not technologically native, he will not understand the notions which experts and specialists use within the existing paradigm of the technologies, such as the digital footprint. The footprint is something which we consciously live. This is about our purchase, this is about transactions, this is about our banking relations. But people sitting in that room, probably, they do not know how many digital shadows which we live. This is what we live, not on purpose, such as, for instance, video images. And probably you heard about the first trial against versus the government of Russia. One of the Moscow residents actually filed a lawsuit because actually her image taken by the CCTV camera provided the location of that lady there, which she didn't want to disclose. And probably the digital shadows, this is not about the understanding of the situation, but this is about our senses, this is about symbols. If you remember 1990s, if you remember the technologies there, you remember that actually there was such a right that actually if you put a CD disc on the windshield of your car, then the radar technology which measures the speed of your car will not work. And we see now that there are more and more people wearing beards because actually in this way the system will not recognize their faces. It hinders the face recognition. So a person, a man, being a social animal reduces everything to certain symbols, and most of the people do not understand how the digital systems work, but they try to believe in that digital system, and this is what becomes more and more relevant. And then a paradox arises in order to provide better and better services, which, as Sergey said, are more and more valued by the clients. The corporations and the states are collecting more and more data. They are building digital twins of a man or the groups of people. And risks arise that once we have big data, it actually may cause a temptation to manipulate these groups of people. And these groups of people may be manipulated not only by the state, by the government, although you know the case with different accusations against Russia and against a number of the foreign companies which were accused of manipulating the people, but it may also change the customers' behavior. This is what Skolkovo startups are trying to sell in the market. This is about the manipulation of the consumers, which may make the consumers buy lots of products, more products from this or that manufacturer. But today we are going to speak about the ethical norms and where the line can be found. So there is just one step separating the religion from the manipulation, and actually this is all available within our smartphones.
This is quite interesting because when you talk about, for example, security and fear of being tracked or having a data breach, as Guzeliya mentioned, that people are scared about this because they don't understand what that looks like from a mechanical point of view. And they don't know what the potential outcome or damage could be. And part of that trust building also requires that they trust in how things will be managed, the liability structure. When something goes wrong, how am I made whole? When I don't understand, where can I find more information? And if something isn't clear, how do I find the answers? This is quite interesting when we're talking about behavior because lack of trust clearly affects how people choose their products, how they choose to purchase those products, if they trust the mechanism, if they trust this thing, or if they want face-to-face. And when we're moving to digital, clearly face-to-face isn't an option. But it does come down to ethics, and one of the key components of trust is ethics. So how do we bring an ethical framework into digital banking, and how do we really start that conversation about ethics in the ecosystem, not just between banks and the technologists, but between the industry and its customers? And one of those things I know that you have been focusing on, Mikhail, is the actual building of that ethical framework. What does that look like from a regulatory perspective? Can you share your thoughts on that?
Да, спасибо. Вообще,
Yes, thank you so much. And actually, the problems and stories which have been discussed today have a lot of discourses and a lot of aspects, and ethics can be one of them. And ethics, in general, is a kind of a foundation of a corporate culture, because if you have a look at the definition of ethics, it includes certain norms of morality which define behavior and basis, which is the starting point for the corporate culture as well. And as we understand corporate management as a foundation which is used for a civilized financial business, then ethics is to be part of corporate management. And we are quite active in terms of our work of integration of corporate management code in financial markets and inclusion of issues, how the organization is to interact with its clients. And everything starts with a kind of culture which is adopted in a certain organization. If an organization thinks that it's okay to deceive a client to earn more money and to use his or her lack of knowledge, or to use his lack of understanding in terms of new tools and technologies, it automatically leads to the zone of risk, and in some time it can be transformed into mistrust to products and organization. And the story about Digit is quite peculiar, because we have been talking about it today and we will be talking about it tomorrow. Digits are transforming the world and the landscape, and we don't see any end to that, as it's usually written in literature. And we see the increase of the technological pace, and we must be ready for the fact that the pace of the change of design and the form of provision of financial services will also be happening at the increased speed, because what we are scrutinizing and studying today won't be relevant tomorrow, and today's problems can be not relevant for tomorrow as well. And so, coming back to your question, how important is ethics and fundamental rules? If we are coming from the fact that a model of any financial company, and not only financial, of any company, has certain principles of interactions and relations with clients, openness, decent behavior, transparency, giving the whole scope of information to a client about all the technical characteristics of the product. Then this foundation will be solid, and then trust, which is quite a fragile notion, this trust won't be lost in this case. And as we know, trust is built in the run of years, and it is lost in the run of 5 minutes, because one inappropriate action can distort this trust, and you'll need years to restore it and to revive it again. So we need to remember about risks, and that's why we're talking about that much. And that's why for the central bank, as for the regulator, ethical issues are one of the cornerstones of the sustainability of the overall system. Thank you.
It actually prompts another question for me about, and you said that what is relevant today may not be relevant tomorrow. Is technology changing the nature of ethics? And can we shape policy or regulation that will stand the test of time? I don't expect anyone to have an answer, but I do think that is a question that we need to consider. Will our ethics and moral framework change as digitization becomes the true norm? Maybe you do have some thoughts, and think about this for a second, because I'm genuinely curious if the nature of trust and ethics will change based on technology's impact. Kirill, I know that you also have a few thoughts on this, but before we get to those, I want to ask Max, because he's also got an overarching view of what this ethical framework discussion looks like. Max, would you share with us what that discussion consists of right now?
Yes, sure. Я хотел продолжать на самом деле мысль Mikhaila.
I would like to continue the thought which Michael has mentioned, and I would define it in not that good as you did. For me, ethics is acting better for the interests of a consumer, and actually there is a shareholder in a bank, and for instance, he's interested in dividends and profit, and there can be a conflict. For instance, I think that it's evident for everyone who's present here today, banks and insurance companies are not acting for the interest of a consumer, of a client. If you have a consumer and if his deposit is over, he is asking his bank advisor, what do I do with this money now, because the rates were dropping, and this client advisor says that maybe he should buy some investment product to some insurance product, and everyone understands, everyone who's present here understands that it is not an advice for the sake of a client, for the well-being of a client. So I think that the topic of ethics is not that present because we don't have incentives or motivation to act for the interest of the consumer. And Mikhail and I think others present here are ready to pay 5 rubles more for an egg from a hen which lives a happy life, a free and happy life. But I think that that's an ethics connected with agriculture. Happy hen, better eggs. So that's why I pay more. But a bank which is offering a product to me which is clean or ethically better, I'm not ready to pay more and to get less for such a product. So I think it's a question to you as to a regulator. To what extent is it expedient to motivate ethical aspects in a financial sphere through some kind of certification or bonuses for ethical aspects present in the activity. So if I may, I would like to make a short remark. Max, first and foremost, thank you for voicing the examples of unethical behavior of financial companies. This time, usually we are to do that, and it's very pleasant for me that we have changed our roles right now. And in practice, we frequently see unethical types of behavior, and sometimes it is completely unethical. For instance, it is relevant for salespeople. So the logics of protection of the weak side, of the weak party, is the cornerstone of consumer rights protection as it is. And why are we talking about that, about the importance of ethics? It is not pure words, it is about rules, because ethics influences corporate governance, and it is in turn defining the rules of behavior to clients, to consumers, and violation of those corporate rules as a serious violation is a misdemeanor, and we as regulators have a right to withdraw the head of the company, to put him from away from office, who let the things slide and let the situation when such violation occurred and that such violations prosper in his company. So we need to have some incentives, but on the other hand, we need to have some punishment tools. Only in this case, the system will be working, will be able to work. And also, I would like to say that we haven't finalized this process. Somewhere we have moved further in some issues were still standing still, but I think that this issue is to penetrate the overall corporate culture of any company, starting with the board of directors, ending up with ordinary salespeople.
I think it's quite interesting that ethics looks one way from one perspective, and it looks another for another group. So the bigger question that we have to concern ourselves with is, how do we ensure ethics are standard and interoperable across the various parts of the ecosystem, from incentives and the sales side to the customer protection to the most vulnerable to even the obligation to the shareholder. What does ethics look like when an entire group comes together? I think that's one of the most difficult questions to answer. And I want to make sure that we also, Kirill, that you're able to comment. But these are questions that don't have answers, but we need to entertain them, and we need to make sure we have some sort of agreement that there is a principle that is applied across the industry. But Kirill, maybe you've got some thoughts.
Да, я попытаюсь на вопрос Ghela ответить.
Yes, I will try to answer your question whether digitalization and introduction of technologies is going to influence ethics and cultural interactions in society. I think yes. So let us scrutinize what ethics and culture are about. In fact, that's a number of values which are expressed in relations and ties in society in the form of unwritten rules, which can be transferred into written rules afterwards with the need to comply with certain regulations, as Mikhail said. But the problem is that today, depending on the value system, we have two banking systems existing. For instance, Islamic banks system, which have certain ideology statements, and their profit model is quite different from the Western type of banking. And for instance, there are cultural and value differences based on religion, and they influence the way the banking system works. And so our transformation as transformation of a digital society will influence the accessibility and transparency of information about all of us. The way that the paradigm of values changing is inevitable, and our relations, including the cultural codes as well, will change at the same time. So imagine the situation that our life is as transparent as the situation when there is no such notion as some private secret. And actually we see this trend going on. For instance, It is true, at least for banking business, decreased margin, decreased commission, because we see the increased competition, and it is the most primitive example. So my answer is yes. Digitalization and development of digital technologies and landscapes will influence cultural codes and our ethics. I don't know for better or for worse, but it will certainly influence that and business models as a result as well.
I agree. If we look at privacy, it is a 20th century concept. And in the digital space, there is almost no privacy because we leave behind a footprint. And so the morality will change in terms of true privacy. What does that look like? That becomes a value and a potential business model, preservation of privacy or privacy as a service. So I personally do think that, but that is only one instance. Are there other instances that we should be thinking about? And how do we communicate that to the customer? Part of this is we're having a discussion as industry insiders. We understand this because we're close to the problem. That doesn't translate to most people, especially around financial literacy and understanding what's going on. So is financial literacy actually necessary? Or should we simplify financial products so we don't have to worry about financial literacy? Do we really have to understand finance if we organize and build products clearly, simply, and transparently? Which, in my mind, in terms of ethics, transparent, clear, and simple should actually serve as a standard. Viktor, you're dealing with this, especially in e-money. So give us an idea of what financial literacy versus product simplicity, what that equation looks like, and where the balance is.
Спасибо за.
Thank you very much for a wonderful but complicated question, and I would like to divide it into two parts, if I may, because a financial product in the model world is a product itself, for instance, a bank account or an e-wallet account, and at the same time it's an interface which is used to communicate with this product. In terms of an interface, my opinion is the following. It has to be as simple, convenient, understandable as the one which can exclude the need for training or elimination of illiteracy, because all of us are used to the fact that all products we have, even if they are complicated, for instance, if we take an iPhone, it's a very complicated technological product. Nevertheless, the curve to learn how to use this iPhone is very short, and that's one of the genial sides of this product. And when Steve Jobs perished, I think this curve ceased to be that prompt and that short, and I personally do not like that. So that's about interface. We use complicated products, but we do not learn how to use them. And so in terms of the products, in terms of financial products, it's quite complicated to do that because they are biometrical ones, no matter we like it or not, whether we like it or not. And here I see the only but quite a boring outcome. I think that mass products are to be completely standardized. If a bank sells a credit card or a credit or a loan to a client, they have to have a typical agreement which is endorsed and approved by the central bank, and this agreement has to have a limited number of parameters, which is mandatory for all the banks correspondingly. And in other words, the structure of the overwhelming number of products which is available for unqualified users, and so that's an extension of the term unqualified investor, is to be defined by the state at a certain point, because in reality, banking finance business is becoming a commodity type business, and the differences in products For instance, in a credit card of Alpha Bank from Sberbank or Tinkoff Bank is not that significant. It is not the difference in the essence. It's just the difference in marketing. Which bank sells it better, in a better way. So I think this marketing component is to be eliminated. And as any commodity, these products have to have clear-cut characteristics. For instance, electricity is 220 volts. You need to have 60 degrees of hot water running in your tap at home. So we need to have same parameters set for our cards, for our e-wallets, for our credit agreements, whatever.
Interesting. Guzeliya, you've also tackled a bit of this financial literacy versus product simplicity. How does your research sort of align with what Viktor has been talking about?
Спасибо. Ну, с нашей точки зрения, финансовая...
From our standpoint, financial literacy is not eliminated simplicity. I think these are things which are substituting each other. And if we talk about the topic of financial literacy, it was born long ago, maybe 20 years ago, and it was an answer to prompt development of financial markets, their breakthrough. And I think, and I'm sure that we will always be lagging behind the development of financial markets. And according to our estimates, approximately 30% of people think that financial products is something too complicated. They tend saying that I don't know what it is about, I need additional consultations. And so the issue of simplicity is partially subjective. So what is simple? What is a simple product about? So on the one hand, I have a motivation to understand what is it about. I'm curious to understand how it works. But on the other hand, I'm just lazy. I don't want to deal with that. It's quite a complicated issue.
Мы очень много внимания уделяем...
We pay a lot of attention to the research of the loyalty, consumers' loyalty, the so-called NPS index. Loyalty is about the following. Every financial organization actually is fighting for the loyalty of their customers, to retain the customers, even if there are some failures. Actually, they would like to make sure that the customers would forgive them. So what loyalty is affected by? The product itself. And this proceeds from the mathematical modeling. The product itself contributes only 10% to that loyalty. So actually, all the financial services look alike, are all the same for the consumers. About 30% of the loyalty actually is generated by the service. And for instance, if you cannot offer a certain level of the service, average service, you will be perceived as a poor financial institute. The rest, what influences, what affects the loyalty, this is about the image. This is the feedback from the client, starting from emotions. And this is what people say, this is my financial company. This is the company with which I want to be. With all the digitalization and unification, still, actually, the consumers value the care, and I do believe that the future belongs to taking care. The consumers vote with their hearts, and the financial literacy. This is one of the channels which brings about the loyalty, and this is not something which excludes.
Being the 2 points that maybe are a problem. Or if we're looking at product and understanding product, it's actually about experience. Max, you've said this before, and I'm going to remind the audience of it, but I want you to tell us why this is so important. It's not about the product, it's about the end thing. Nobody, for example, wants a mortgage. What they want is a house. And it's actually also about that experience. I want an outcome. I want to be able to do something. I don't want to have to buy a product. I want to do something. And money and financial services is about that. If banks started to approach this as outcome, not product, what would that look like, and why do you advocate moving to that model? Especially in terms of building trust and increasing someone's understanding of what they're actually doing when they purchase the product itself.
Очень хороший вопрос.
That's a very good question. Guzeliya proposed the idea that customers are voting with their hearts, and several years ago we proposed the topic of being client-centric or client-driven. But client-centric, actually, this is a very unclear notion, dubious notion, and probably voting with the heart, this is a more right approach. Really, the banks started using this term only at the front end when they communicated with the clients, but really they did not take that idea to implement that within themselves. A client-centric bank, in my interpretation, is the company which actually is not staying within their silo. So meaning that one department deals with the risk, another department deals with the IT, another department lives within the marketing silo, but they all live the silos. But actually, the banks have to realize that there are 15 or 20 different needs experienced by the clients, and the bank has to work as an ecosystem in order to meet those needs. It should be reliable, transparent, and consistent. And we have to provide these services this way. Not that some person who works for the risks department has to optimize something and IT expert would do something differently. They have to work consistently. I do believe that the banks should transform themselves the way that we actually have to be centered around the client's needs. And a major progress in that respect will expand the needs, meaning that the needs of the clients would go beyond the financial needs. The banks have to embrace all the needs of the clients, and the financial needs are just only one of the needs of the clients. And the question which was raised is about setting up an ecosystem, and this is good, but the ecosystem will give a competitive edge.
This is that if a organization has no silos, that impacts how an end customer understands the products. That's an interesting potential model. Deserves some exploration. Viktor, I think you had something to add to this. Yes, please.
In essence, I would like to very briefly comment on what's been said about loyalty. In my point of view, as an amateur, I think that the banks now overestimate the meaning and significance of loyalty, and this brings them into a trap. This happens for many reasons. First of all, really, we live with the short-term notions and short-term processes. We have more short-term beliefs, short-term appeals, and the products now look the same. These are not tailored products, and these are tailored products, they just disappear. And thirdly, the technologies, they kill loyalty. For instance, do you remember the retailers of household electronics, which distribute the loyalty discount cards, which actually invested into the commercials on TV? There are no longer such retailers because everyone actually is Googling the products on Yandex or anywhere else, and they are making online purchases. I have no reasons to buy an iPhone from iPort if I may buy the same iPhone in some small shop 2,000 rubles cheaper, with the condition that the warranty, which can be checked using the device's identification number, and that's it. So provided that the warranty is the same. So the banks have to learn to work in the environment with no long-term loyalty. So once you give it a try and like that, and you stay with that company, if not, you just move to another client.
Notion, because there's something called customer lifetime value that matters. That is not about the product, and if we have a common standard for product in the industry, it's about experience and trust. And those are two things that differentiate each institution. And as Max pointed out, there may be an opportunity to affect that if we reorganize the ecosystem inside of a bank. I want to make sure that we get to a little bit more of the financial literacy challenges, but Max, one last comment.
Max is sitting nervously, he wants to answer and object, so the discussion gets more lively.
Object away.
Ну, на то, что мой коллега сейчас сказал.
I'd like to object to what my colleague said. I totally disagree with that idea that loyalty is killed by the technologies. Why banks have to opt for the lifestyle banking, for the why they are doing those reforms? They're doing that in order to increase loyalty. And I do think that the loyalty will be increased drastically in the near future, and we'll agree with that, with saying that the banking product within the bank will be white label, and it will change very soon. But we are following the Chinese example when a person lives within his own ecosystem as WeChat, and a person there doesn't have to leave that environment because he may get whatever he needs there. And customers actually will no longer care how much this service will cost, because you just make one click more and you don't have to compare the prices. So the loyalty in this ecosystem will be much higher.
Я просто хотела...
I'd like to confirm that with the figures. Unfortunately, Max, speaking about the financial services market, in terms of figures, the loyalty is decreasing, but there are certain stakeholders, certain very high-tech companies which build their communication the way that their loyalty is going up. There are some separate examples. Netflix and Amazon, they are leaders in terms of the loyalty, but still, these high-tech companies, actually, they can boast high loyalty. But generally speaking, the loyalty is declining, and this is a big challenge, how to build a good communication with the clients.
Yeah, thanks.
I'd like to actually appease everyone, reconcile everyone, so people actually are disagreeing with one another, and very soon they will be short-fronting each other, but I don't see any contradiction here. The loyalty to the owner of the product or to the manufacturer is replaced or substituted with the loyalty to the interface. A person has to be loyal to something or somebody, but really interfaces are substituting the manufacturers. So people do not see actually who is behind the interface. Yandex Taxi, an example driven by Viktor, is a very good one. Then European Payment Directive will result in the fact that the people will no longer see the banks behind the interfaces, and the one who offers the best interface will be the winner. And certainly it will result in the loyalty volatility, but it will not affect the loyalty per se. One more comment. I think actually that I find myself in a fairy tale situation when people actually say what I had to tell you. So Viktor said that all the products have to be standardized. Usually people say vice versa. When we propose certain draft laws related to standardization, the market will say that this would kill the competition, this decreases the competitive advantage, and it prevents the clients from making a good choice. But really, the consumer actually cannot grasp fully any financial product. It requires a lot of analysis. That's why all the products have to be standardized. But at the same time, the standardization has to leave room for differentiation. And it means that you have to use the same language to motivate the consumer's choice. I do think that what we can start from is about the key documents about the risks, and every company would somehow generate their own documents, but these documents actually would contain all the necessary information. The regulator really has to provide good and efficient documents, and the rules set for such key documents
are different in terms of how it languaged, but the product structure is, the risk structure is the same. It's wonderful when industry starts to repeat what the regulators want. I'm a former regulator myself, so.
Industry is ahead of regulator, so we just confirm what had been said before.
But when you're speaking the same language, it's fantastic. Would that, I mean, all of this conversation has been around some very specific points that lead to better understanding financial products. And yet you're looking at it from a policy perspective and implementing initiatives to address financial literacy on a massive scale. All of this, from interface to architecture to marketing to product structure to behavioral changes because it's a digital product. What are some of these challenges? This is a complex thing. What does the central bank look at in terms of increasing financial literacy and protection, but also its changing nature of understanding what's going on? What are some of the things you're looking at?
Спасибо. Очень хорошо.
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. I will try to provide several bullet points, short statements, or several assumptions to trigger more discussion. Whether we need the financial literacy or we do not need that. We do believe that we need financial literacy, and it is very important, but financial literacy doesn't equal financial knowledge. So these are two things different. Literacy, in our current understanding, includes three components. The knowledge, or the understanding of the essence. This is about the settings. To some extent, this is even more actually important than the knowledge, because settings means a certain system of values, how you behave. And this is the part of the business ethics and the behavior. These are the three components which have to be addressed in aggregate. A person may know, but never do that, or may know how to, but he would want to do that in our way. And finally, only if we combine those three factors or components, we may bring about an adequate system. We pay a lot of attention to the financial literacy. We have a joint strategy, a 7-law strategy with the Ministry of Finance, and we try to work with every target group. And here I'd like to disclose my second bullet point. Our environment is lacking homogeneity. It is not homogeneous. Working with the preschool children, with the school students, with the undergraduates, and with the adults. These are totally different groups of people, and there is no one-size-fits-all. We have to take consideration on these specific features. It is more convenient for us to work with the school students because actually we can work through the educational programs. If we speak about the financial market, all these fundamental things are about several things. For instance, the higher incomes are, the more risks you have to bear. And the measurements show that more than 30% of the people believe that the more you are paid, or the higher your incomes are, the less financial risks you bear. And they explain that by the fact that if the company, for instance, earns a lot, then it can pay a lot to the client. And if, for instance, its IRR is only 5%, that it is on the brink of bankruptcy. And while we have such controversies, while people confuse these basic notions. For instance, we cannot offer good financial products. All the financial pyramids, this or that way, are based on the higher revenues or higher incomes, higher than the average one. And this is what the school children understand better than anyone else. This is what we can do at school. But you cannot teach everything at school. Once you grow up, you run into the things which have never been taught at school. Digital changes the landscape, the way that the knowledge becomes obsolete and outdated very fast. We have to bring up a kind of a system of patterns, some stereotypes of behavior, certain system of values. Do you know how the combustion engine is built? Probably, basically, we all know that there are some pistons or cylinders and fuel is injected. And if I ask you where you actually learned that from, you will say that your father told you or you read that in the newspaper. But I left school. I had to attend certain courses, and I was taught as the driver. And we believe that if you get your driving license, you also have to know how to repair your car. But most people don't know what to do about the car. They know how to fill water and how to refuel it, but it doesn't mean that they drive worse. But their needs actually are different. They have to know which buttons to push, and that's it. I just think that in 10 years, robotization will substitute the vehicles. You will get into the autonomous vehicle and push the necessary button. You have to understand the risks, you have to understand the dangers, and this is more valuable than just having certain knowledge. Speaking about the adults, this is what we are doing. We have a very powerful online outreach program. We have a special website, webcult.info, dedicated to the financial literacy. We do a lot of pilot projects. We even hold certain examinations in terms of financial literacy. Just several 100,000 people wanted to test their financial knowledge. We have different smart games, intellectual games, and this is how we want to reach every target group. But finally, whatever efforts we apply, still any armor may be broken by the ammunition, by special ammunition. And for instance, if you Google how to improve your financial literacy, you will find dozens of different courses. And top 10 offers would be about buying some cryptocurrency, and that's it. But they would be in the second layer. But the first layer will tell you how important it is to be financial literate. Push this button, push that button, and on the second tier, they would offer you to buy some cryptocurrency. You have to somehow kill those stereotypes, wrong stereotypes. We are blocking phishing websites. We are blocking malicious software. We are blocking pyramids. So we are fighting against those who undermine our financial literacy. But how soon we are going to get the outcomes, the results, this is a big question. You cannot reach big success in a year's time. You have to spend dozens of years to make progress there. We are doing a lot of measurements, and the financial knowledge stays at the same level, but the financial behavior actually is on the rise, and therefore we remain optimists. We are on the right track.
Is not the same thing as behavior. That is absolutely true. This actually leads us to part of the conversation around social engineering, which is back to interface. And it's actually back to the UX and UI, the designing of the journey to purchase the product or to understand the product. There is something about that technology can do, where we can overcome that gap between knowledge and behavior by structuring customer journey in a particular way, or reducing the amount of marketing that is forced down our throats. So let's actually talk about that in terms of social engineering, using technology to not only improve financial literacy, but improve smart, healthy financial behavior. what are you doing and what are you looking at, Sergey? Because this is part of your responsibility. You're looking at satisfying, not only fulfilling the product, but making sure the customer is fully informed and understand, and it's a right fit to the right customer at the right time in their life. What are some of the examples of technology and solutions out there that you are seeing that help improve financial behavior?
Спасибо. Наконец-то я что-то скажу.
Finally, will say something because actually I spoke less than anyone else, but really, social engineering, that's an interesting story.
Тот факт, что
And so there is a fact that it is quite frequently associated with criminal social engineering is a number of tools which criminals use for their black activities and black deeds. But actually it's not true, because social engineering is not about criminality. It's about the functions which are connected with banking, because banks are collecting the behavioral portrait of a client and use different means and channels and so on and so forth. And on the one hand, we have been discussing today that in terms of the penetration into private life, but as banks are reliable organizations which have the increased degree of trust, the increased level of trust, and they're responsible for banking secret, we can forgive banks for doing that. But of course, they do collect information about client behavior, about client portrait, basing on the sums the client has and how much money he spends on different categories of goods. And they can also have big data about client routes. For instance, when the client visits different bank departments and comes to different consultants of banks, and they analyze questions a client asks, and that's a different level of interaction with data about client behavior. And plus, additional aspect is connected with analysis of client behavior via applications requests to mobile operators, and they provide scores dedicated to different requests of clients and their behavior in mobile operator network. And we had definite cases connected with that, and they allow to decrease the number of credits which were not paid back. And actually, that's a complicated story which needs to have special ecosystems created in special storages, different sandboxes, where, for instance, tests are launched, and after that, more information is loaded there. For instance, journals from ATM machines. I don't know what's the purpose for that, but still maybe they find something in that, certain receipts, names, time, so on and so forth. So banks are doing that, and they are extracting specific value out of that. That's the known fact. And what do criminals do? It's quite easier for them. They can understand. It's easier for them to understand one trait of clients' behavior. For instance, when we talk about our digital maturity, and the fact that not all categories use their channels, the clients which do not use them are those which can be attacked. For instance, we have a lot of cases when criminals were using fake documents to close deposits, because those people who had those deposits didn't have any digital channels or digital means, so they didn't know on time that their deposit is closed. And when they find out, eventually everything is done. And so social engineering as a science, or relatively speaking as a field of activity, is quite useful and has a beneficial influence on banking. Of course, it's quite expensive, but doing those things, we have this decreased margin, taking into account all the financial realities, to preserve this, to preserve it, to increase this margin, which had narrowed down before, at least by some percent. And so it leads, and it is conducted within the framework of our Phenopolis story about digitalization. And I think that I would give the floor to Kirill to continue, because I'm talking too much and I'm using a lot of subordinate sentences, and it's very difficult for me to continue.
At your booth, some of what you've been talking about in terms of well-designed delivery, customer experience, digital platform, to understand a little bit more about how you're practically putting that into play. I think we have time just for the final comment on this. And I want to invite you all, if you have questions for any of the panelists, to find them tomorrow, or to reach out to them on the app and directly message them. We can do this, can we not? Because I know there will be a number of questions that you have for them that are unanswered. Please take the time to find them and have that conversation. Because we have one last comment on technology facilitating good outcome. And that comes, they're ready examples when you work with a number of startups. So could you give us one or two examples of some startups that are doing this and who are providing a very good example of what positive social engineering in the context of an ethical framework for good behavior and financial wellness, even if a customer isn't literate? Kirill, please.
Буквально два примера на самом деле. Больше их есть, и компаний таких.
Yes, we have a lot of companies like that, but I will mention just a few, and I would like the whole to react somehow. Who has installed at least one application in the run of the recent month, and who has read a user agreement, client agreement, with which you ought to agree? And so we have a startup which does it for you, which is called Dart, and you know that we have recent statistics that only 10 applications out of top 100 do not give your personal data anywhere else. All others you load from markets and from different platforms, transfer your photos, links, cookies to places you don't know about. And so we have Guard application. It analyzes user agreement and highlights for you specific points for you to agree with them. For instance, if if an application doesn't deceive you and it stipulates that it's going to transfer your data, that's one story. But there is a different one. For instance, there is a company, IB Group, Skolkovo resident, and they deal with cyber investigation and voice aspects as well. And they have done a wonderful thing talking about social engineering. We all behave differently at the laptop or at our computer, and if we use social engineering to understand what the password is, they have created the system of red flags which help to identify a user when he enters a bank interface, and it follows non-typical movements of mouse or traits of behavior which are non-typical for this user, and the system gives a red flag and shows that maybe that's an unauthorized access. And there is also one side effect, a negative one. If a user is drunk, he also is shown the red flag by a system. So it's a certain reserve for security in terms of the money he has in his account.
My bank to make sure I'm not buying anything at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night, for sure. It's quite interesting because technology is advancing at such a rate that we have behavioral biometrics, like you just talked about. We have proper design and consent and authentication frameworks that are in place. We have solutions that are identifying abnormal behaviors in terms of interaction or in terms of transaction type. But we're also looking at, especially where I'm sitting in London, of clarifying what a product is and what it's supposed to do and what the outcome is, not some of the technical terms and conditions that we describe it as in the industry, but something that the end customer can understand. And at the intersection of technology, regulation, the startup community, the industry consulting, those who are running their own businesses, academia who is studying it, and the regulator who is creating policy around it, the question of how does trust exist in this new world? How do we think about delivering the services to our customer becomes incredibly important, and understanding the human relationship with technology and digitization. It is something I believe we'll be discussing for a number of years to come, but I wanted to thank the panel. Thank you very much to Viktor, to Kirill, to Sergey, to Max, to Mikhail, and to Guzeliya. Please join me in thanking them for this time, and do remember, reach out with your questions. They are more than happy to entertain them. My name is Ghela. Thank you very much.